Hello, everyone. We would be discussing the text A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. First and foremostly, we'll take a look at the historical aspect of this text. It's often hailed as a feminist Bible, considered as an expansion of her lecture on women and fiction, which she delivered at Newham College and Girton College, two of the most prestigious colleges at Cambridge University in 20th to 26th October 1928. The title is particularly significant because it has a focus on both literal meaning, which is space and money, and also symbolic meaning, which focuses on freedom and autonomy of women authors. It was first published in the year 1929, and the book has 6 chapters. Virginia Woolf talks about one of our most essential points in feminist deliberations. She says a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. This becomes the central point. She talks about women's lack of free self expression. Turning to history, she finds so little data about the everyday lives of women that she understands there is a necessity to track the conditions of women, how they lived, the living conditions of women. Our focus is going to be chapter 3 of this seminal text, and she talks about the most important aspect that it's as if a perennial puzzle why there's no woman who wrote a word of that extraordinary literature which was produced in the Elizabethan era. She laments and questions the lack of authentic fact about women's real lives, and then she looks at the works of historians like G.M. Trevelyan, particularly his work History of England, and she finds out that women appear only marginally in official history, official recorded history. This leads to certain key aspects that she discusses throughout the text. And as already mentioned, our focus remains on chapter 3, the most important chapter in the book. She traces a perturbed history to understand the difference in the sense women in literature versus women in history, and then women literatures. In literature, we see that women loom large, full of personality, quite vibrant. For example, the characters like Cleopatra, Lady Macbeth, Rosalind, from As You Like It, Desdemona, Duchess of Malfi, to name a few, they are full of vigor in the characters that is sketched by male artists, male writers. However, in fact, in history, if you look up history, women were locked up, beaten, flung about the room, and often denied choice and marriage. They were illiterate and confined to domesticity in those eras. Strikingly, she talks about the two female monarchs, Elizabeth and Mary. They do appear, but the ordinary women is absolutely invisible from the intellectual scenario. Turning to history, she finds so little data about the everyday women's lives that she calls for supplement to history. It's a very important phrase that she uses, and it suggests feminist historiography much decades before actually it became an academic discipline. So this call is to research into women's marriages, education, domestic life, could be childbearing, and if they had a room of their own, both in the literal sense and also in the symbolic sense. I've added portions of the essay for your own look. Then she moves on to a case study, a literary hypothetical case study of a probable case of Judith Shakespeare. Judith Shakespeare, the hypothetical sister of William Shakespeare. The important quote over here from the passage of the text, she says that they had no money, evidently, according to Professor Trevelyan. Probably they were sometimes 15 or 16 when they were married off. It's as if, like, they might have been gifted with artistic capabilities, but probably they remained at home. They were adventurous, imaginative, as was their male counterparts, but the world did not see that critical thinking skills. The world did not see those artistic skills because they were denied of education. They were denied of basic rights to express themselves. Probably their parents married them off quite early. And then she sets up this imaginary character of Judith Shakespeare and how she might have been treated in the household of the Shakespeares. This literary case study, this imagined case study, leads us to understand few basic things. That is, differences in opportunities. While Shakespeare goes to the grammar school, probably learns Latin, reads Ovid and Virgil over there, the sister Judith is denied schooling, scolded for reading in the attic, and therefore her talent is repressed. There are social restrictions on women. Probably the parents arrange an early marriage. Even though she resists marriage, she might have been beaten, scolded. They might have, this might have created a guilt in her, and then that guilt might have led into obedience. Now, women's lives were tied to family honor and chastity. That's a very important aspect that Woolf talks about. And is there really a space to honor the creative pursuit of women? And in what sense they were silenced? The potential of women's true genius was silenced in those eras is something to look, to dig deeper into, to trace into. Was it the lack of talent or the lack of opportunity is a profound question that we're left with. And another seminal quotation over here, that is Anon, who wrote so many poems without signing them, was often a woman. Probably she might have felt scared to reveal her identity that she's been writing, which is almost a very masculine attribute in those eras. Probably that something led to these anonymous works. And probably all these anonymous people were actually women. They could not come to the forefront and claim their identity, claim their autonomy. So, could we term it as social hostility? Is another question that we are left with after reading the text. And what is this question of masked in male identity? We see multiple examples like Currer Bell, George Eliot. Mary Ann Evans is actually George Eliot, but she masks herself in the male identity, Currer Bell. Again, George Sand and all the victims of inner strife, as their writings prove, sought ineffectively to veil themselves by using the name of a man. She also cites male authors. They also might have faced challenge, but women's challenges were much more compared to the male challenges, the male writers' challenges. Another important quote is that in the first place, to have a room of her own, let alone quiet room or a soundproof room, was out of question. Sometimes the parents were exceptionally rich or very noble, even up to the beginning of the 19th century. But then, to have money is something. The financial stability, the financial independence is what she pinpointedly talks about. The best woman was intellectually the inferior of the worst man. Mr. Oscar Browning, he gave this as a lecture. This quotation is from a lecture that he gave in Cambridge University, and Virginia Woolf quotes this and sarcastically points out the patriarchal aspect which could be seen through this particular quotation. The key literary and historical figures discussed in this essay would be historians like G.M. Trevelyan, his book History of England, which Woolf takes up as a primary resource to understand the condition of women in Elizabethan England. She also looks into the literary women in fiction, written definitely by men, the beautiful characters that the male writers sketched. She talks about the probable imagined character of Judith Shakespeare. She also talks about women writers who used pseudonyms like George Eliot and Currer Bell. And then she talks about others like Florence Nightingale and Lady Presborough as well. The key arguments that she unmasks in this particular essay is that women definitely need an intellectual freedom and autonomy to express themselves. So the word room over here is definitely metaphorical. She also pinpointedly talks about the economic independence. Specifically, she mentions 50 pounds a year. Hypothetical example of Judith Shakespeare again becomes a very, very important example, as you know, this shows that women definitely lacked space, time, money, and liberty. She urged students, scholars, and researchers to look up a historiographical understanding of the conditions of women during those eras, and the discussion that leads us to understand that not that women were not capable to come up with these artistic, critical pursuits, intellectual pursuits, to write fiction, literary pieces, or engage in intellectual discussions, not because they lacked talent, but because the social conditions were not conducive enough, did not allow them to express creatively, intellectually. Thus, to change women's fiction, women's material and social lives must change, is the thought that she leaves us with. Thank you.